The standard gauge. Railway from Mombasa to Nairobi cost $3.2 billion. The investors? Not Western, Chinese. Pan back. From Djibouti's coastline to Lagos's docks, over the past decade, Chinese capital has rebuilt more African infrastructure than any single nation since the colonial era. Railways, ports, highways, power plants, universities, stadiums, the headquarters of the African Union itself. They lent somewhere between $170 and $300 billion across the continent. The question Africa is asking now, is this partnership or is it a new kind of dependency? Chapter 1. What Belt and Road is. 2013. Xi Jinping in Kazakhstan, then in Indonesia. He launches what becomes China's largest foreign policy project in modern history, the Belt and Road Initiative. The vision: one continuous network of infrastructure and trade routes connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. A land belt, a sea road, hence the name. Today, more than 150 countries have signed on. Over $1 trillion has been committed globally. On the African continent, 52 of 54 nations are participants. Chapter 2, what got built? The Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway, $3.2 billion, 472 kilometers, opened in 2017, cuts the journey from 12 hours to 4, built by a Chinese state-owned contractor. The Addis Ababa to Djibouti Railway, over $4 billion, 752 kilometers. Africa's first cross-border electric railway since the colonial era, opened in 2018. The Lekki deep sea port in Nigeria, $1.5 billion, the largest deep water port in West Africa, operational since 2023. Power plants across Ethiopia, Zambia, Angola, Kenya, highways across more than 30 countries, hospitals, universities, sports stadiums, convention centers. The African Union headquarters itself in Addis Ababa, a $200 million gift from Beijing, until staff later reported finding the building had been hardwired with surveillance equipment, a story both the AU and China still publicly deny. By volume, China has built more African physical infrastructure in the last 20 years than every Western donor combined. Chapter 3, how much money? China lent African governments and state-owned enterprises over $170 billion between the year 2000 and 2023. Some estimates push that number above $300 billion when private debt is included. China is now the largest single bilateral creditor on the African continent, larger than France, larger than the United States, larger than the World Bank's annual disbursements in some years. Annual Chinese lending to Africa peaked in 2016 at $28 billion. Since then, it has fallen sharply. By 2023, new annual lending was below $5 billion. The COVID-19 pandemic reshuffled everything. Beijing went from being the lender to being the negotiator, renegotiating, restructuring, sometimes forgiving parts of African debt. Chapter 4, the debt trap narrative. The phrase debt trap diplomacy was coined in 2017. The example used most often: Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, China lent. Sri Lanka could not repay. China took a 99-year lease. Western newspapers ran with it. China lures Africa into debt. China seizes ports. China captures African resources. The reality is more complicated. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University, the most cited academic source on Chinese lending to Africa, have documented over 1,000 Chinese loans to African governments. They have not found a single case where China seized a strategic asset from an African country. But why, and this matters, African countries did get into trouble. Zambia, Ghana, Ethiopia, the debt distress was real. The truth is this: Chinese lending did not single-handedly trap Africa. African governments borrowed too much from too many sources. China was one of them, often the largest, almost never the only one. Chapter 5: Who actually defaulted? Zambia, 2020, the first African nation to default during COVID, owed China roughly $6 billion. The restructuring took 18 months and revealed how complicated debt held by multiple Chinese lenders had become. Ghana, 2022, defaulted on its Eurobonds. China was only about 5% of total external debt. The bigger creditors were private bondholders and the World Bank. Ethiopia, 2023, defaulted on a Eurobond payment. Chinese loans played a major role in the underlying distress. Kenya, not yet in default, but in clear distress. Its standard gauge railway debt is part of the story. So is its global Eurobond exposure. The pattern is clear. Debt distress is real, but it is not all Chinese. African public debt is split across Eurobonds, the World Bank, the IMF, China, and a growing number of private creditors. The China problem is partly a real Chinese problem and partly a story Western lenders prefer to tell instead of examining their own role. Chapter 6: The strings attached. Most Chinese loans require Chinese contractors to build the project. Many require Chinese steel, Chinese cement, Chinese workers, which limits how much of the loan actually circulates inside the African economy receiving it. Many Chinese loans to resource-rich countries are resource-backed, repaid in oil, in copper, in cocoa. Angola's deep-water petroleum has serviced Chinese loans for over a decade. Construction quality varies dramatically. Some projects are built to international specifications. Others have failed within a few years of opening. Both happen, sometimes on the same continent in the same year. And while Chinese loans do not carry the political conditions Western institutions attach, improve governance, open elections, respect human rights, they carry their own conditions. The One China policy, no formal recognition of Taiwan, quiet support in United Nations votes. Chapter 7: Who benefits? African countries received infrastructure that Western financiers had refused for decades to build. China gained a guaranteed market for Chinese construction firms, raw materials at long-term prices, and political relationships across the entire global South. Western institutions kept attaching political conditions. China did not. So African governments often chose Chinese capital, not because the terms were necessarily better, but because the asks were fewer. The trade was simple: infrastructure for influence. Both sides knew it. Chapter 8: The pivot. Around 2018, Beijing began scaling back. The era of mega projects is ending. The new language is small and beautiful. Smaller projects, greener projects, digital infrastructure, clean energy, less concrete, more fiber. At the FOCAC summit in 2024, China pledged $51 billion over 3 years, but emphasized green energy and digital, not railways and ports. Meanwhile, the United States is pushing the Lobito corridor. The European Union is rebranding aid as the global gateway. The competition is back, and African governments are now negotiating between 3 or 4 bidders, not one. Chapter 9: The real question. The question Africa faces today is not, is China good or bad? The question is, who structures the partnership? Countries that negotiated hard, Kenya pushing China to renegotiate the SGR, Zambia winning a substantive restructuring, have extracted real value from Chinese investment. Countries that did not, that signed opaque contracts with no parliamentary review, that rolled over loans without restructuring, face debt distress today. Belt and Road is not benevolence. It is not predation. It is geopolitics. pursued with infrastructure rather than gunboats. The bridges and railways are real. So are the loans, so are the conditions, so are the trade-offs. Whether Africa walks out of this era richer, more sovereign, more in control, depends not on Beijing. It depends on the African leaders who signed the contracts. Subscribe and keep watching, because this story is being written year by year, project by project, contract by contract, and the next chapter will be written by whichever African